An old house. This is a tale of a place which presented itself as ghostly and/or strange, though whether it was truly haunted, I don't know. When I was around 9 or 10, my parents got the idea they wanted a summer home in Wisconsin, not a cabin or cottage, but a house. As they were, at the time, in their late 40s, early 50s, I think they were looking to try on small town life before making a commitment to retire there. While we would have remained in Chicago until I completed high school, having a getaway would have meant Mom and I spending our summers in bucolic surroundings, with Dad joining us on weekends, our vacation. Then, if things went as planned, I'd head off to college around the time he retired, leaving my parents to settle there permanently, perhaps opening a little antique store to keep busy. The place they chose for this endeavor was Mineral Point, a quaint town which once supported flourishing zinc and lead mining operations. The flavor of the place was English, due to the fact many of the families living there were descended from miners who'd immigrated from Cornwall. My family was not English, but Mom was entranced by the local food, which included pasties, savory turnovers made from meat, potatoes, and carrots that were the original portable lunch toted by Cornish miners. The real estate agent we toured the town with showed us a wide variety of homes, among them an old farmhouse with an attached mini orchard full of apple and cherry trees, a mid-century modern ranch, and the Victorian that's the subject of this story. Built on a hill at the edge of town, the 3-story brick edifice was surrounded by drooping pines, giving it an almost sorrowful air. It also had a structural problem, evidenced by a crack running a few feet up from the foundation. Though fixable, it would be an expensive and time-consuming project, but Dad didn't care. He told Mom if she decided this was the house she wanted, he was willing to invest the money. Dreary from the outside, inside this house, time seemed to have stopped, judging by a kitchen calendar dated September 1935. This was in 1969 or 1970. While the place didn't seem suddenly abandoned, the sink was clean, everything was orderly, the family didn't seem to have taken anything with them. The Hoosier cabinet was stacked with cups and plates, and the round oak table waited to be set for dinner. I imagine there were still 35-year-old canned goods in the pantry. Dad seemed to have no opinion of this strange diorama, but I was fascinated by its preservation of an earlier era. Mom, however, was uneasy, as if sensing something the rest of us could not. In fact, she seemed on the verge of saying, "No need to show us the rest. We're not interested in this house." But when Dad accepted the agent's invitation to take a tour, she seemed to have no choice but to go along. Any claim to semi-modernity the house had dissipated once we left the kitchen, for the rest of it was furnished with late 19th, early 20th century furniture, mostly made of oak. Being a collector of antiquities and dreaming of being a dealer, Dad assessed these pieces with a gleam in his eye, saying how well made and beautiful they were. This pleased the real estate agent, who in turn informed him the family was willing to negotiate the sale of most of the items. Mom rolled her eyes at this. It wasn't that she didn't like antiques, she just didn't want this house or anything associated with it. Having belonged to a family of some means, the house of course had maids' quarters, but they weren't on the top floor as is usual. Instead, they were located in a sort of wing accessible by a separate staircase. There were 2 small bedrooms, a sitting room, and a full bath that I'm sure my parents imagined could be my space. But as I was deciding which room would hold my bed and dresser, I heard Mom shriek, "Oh no!" followed by a door slam. Turning around, I saw Dad trying to comfort her, while the agent apologized. "I don't know how it got in, but the house has been empty quite a while. I suppose it starved." Though I didn't see for myself, I was later told it was a dead cat, discovered at the bottom of the clawfoot bathtub. So much for staging the property. Though there was still more house to explore, Mom was done. As an animal lover, the sight of the dead cat upset her, but clearly something else was bothering her too. Telling the agent abruptly that she didn't like the place or its layout, she insisted we move on to the next property. Thus, the adults headed downstairs, while I lingered behind, having seen a photo album lying on a table. Cool, I thought, picking up the dusty volume. This probably has pictures of the family that owned this place. I'll bring it along to show everybody. Back in the kitchen, the agent was still trying to push the house on Dad, saying she was sure the sellers would take a sizable cut in price to cover the cost of the foundation work, while Mom was standing off to one side, arms crossed in a way that clearly read, "I don't care if you give us this house for free, I don't want it." I walked into this scene waving the album. "Hey, look what I found," I said, plopping the book on the counter as everyone gathered around. The first page had a cameo photo of a middle-aged man, with his name and the words husband and father underneath, followed by 1870, 1918. Oh, I knew what that meant. But still, I continued turning pages. Over 50 years later, I still recall the pics of cars draped with funeral bunting and female mourners enveloped in long black veils, but what stands out the most is the photo of the man whose album it was, laid out in his coffin, 4 tall candelabra surrounding it. "Jesus," Mom whispered. Then she did the proper parental thing and explained the album was someone's funeral book, an old-fashioned way families used to memorialize a loved one. Also, that it was very personal and should be put back right now where I found it. To the agent, she said, "You should give that to the sellers. I'm sure they overlooked it." And that's the story. Except later I heard Mom say to Dad that the house was very wrong in many ways. If it had been empty 35 years, why hadn't it been cleaned out already? Or if it hadn't been empty, who'd lived there, never changing the calendar, or noticing an animal had gotten in and died? Was it the widow of the man whose funeral book I'd found? And if it was, why had no one noticed her inability to cope with everyday tasks and stepped in to help? From the album, it certainly seemed the family had many friends and relatives, so many questions and no answers. I sometimes wonder if that house still exists or if it was torn down, but I've never been back to Mineral Point to find out. Plot twist: I was the ghost. This is a true story, even though it sounds insane. For as long as I can remember, I have always had the same dream, to the point where it is more like a memory. I am standing on the inside of a small marble tomb set low in a hillside. The floor has a diamond pattern and is covered in moss and leaves. I put my hands on the bars of the door. Outside, I can see what looks like a beautiful park. Then I am on the outside looking in. I walk up the hill and approach a tall white monument that is being built. The lower half is covered in scaffolding. I walk around it but don't go inside. I then walk over to another tomb that belongs to someone else. It has a round ceiling with a hole at the top that gives the impression you are standing in a well. I sit on the steps for a while, then move on. There is also a mausoleum. Inside it, there is a small chapel with red and yellow stained glass windows and a wooden cross. Long story short, this tomb and the surrounding graveyard is a real place. It is where my body from my past life is buried. Before I looked it up, I had no idea where they had laid me to rest. I didn't even know they had stuck me in the temporary tomb while they built the monument where I am now. Last May, I was able to visit my own grave and retrace the path I took in my dream memory. Everything was exactly as I remembered it. But that's not the craziest part of this story. While I was in town, I decided to go on the local ghost tour because I figured, hey, why not? A guy with a lantern led me and a small group of people around all the historical places. The main person they wanted to hear about was myself. It felt so odd to listen to him describe my own death. what happened to my body, and how they laid, or rather didn't lay, me to rest. The whole time these people have no idea that the dead guy is standing right there next to them. But it was the last story he told that got to me. Apparently, while the monument was being built, the workers saw his ghost, a tall black shadow, walk up from the temporary tomb and wander around the construction and through the graveyard. They were so frightened that the town decided to open my coffin to make sure he was really dead. The tour guide described my dream, the exact route I took. I felt like vomiting. I had no idea anyone had seen anything in the graveyard. It gave me chills. I kind of just stood there and listened to this guy talk, my heart racing. The fact that I was a ghost and then got reincarnated is so mind-blowing. Like, how does that even work? They never should have opened that damn coffin.